you. Let's try something a little bit different. I want you to join me in a little visualization. So get comfortable. It's sort of the end of the day. Maybe not look at the screen in front of you for a little while. And picture this scene. You're in a boat, a kayak or a canoe. You're paddling on a very still lake. It's sun has just come up, mist on the water. It's very quiet. You're paddling along, very peaceful. And then there's a thud, and the boat rocks, and you flip over, and you're in the water, and you like come up for breath, gasp for air. You look around, you don't know what's happened, and you see behind you some teenagers, and they're pointing at you, and they're laughing. They've swum up behind and flipped you out of your boat. How would you feel in this situation? I'll put some of you in the front on the spot. What emotion? Can you name the emotion you would be feeling? Rage. Good. Wow, you right there, rage. That's awesome. I heard anger. Anything else? What do you think? Embarrassment. That's a good one. I've had people say shame, right? Taking it in like I was somehow responsible. I shouldn't have been here. Something's wrong with me. All of those things. Now imagine the scene again. Let's sort of rewind. And you're in the boat, and it's quiet, paddling along, and you hear the thud. You flip over, you're in the water, you get your head up above, you gasp for breath, and you look around at what's happened, and you see that your boat has run into a piece of driftwood, and that's upset the boat and put you in the water. What emotion might you feel here? Anybody? Not ashamed, right? Maybe a little frustrated, maybe nothing at all. The interesting part about this is that you can actually decide to feel the same way in both of those circumstances. That being in the water, that rush of emotion, that fight or flight instinct is natural and important, keeps us alive, but the resulting emotions that come from us can be a choice as opposed to an automatic response. And you can get better at that over time. And this is not repressing our emotions. This is understanding, acknowledging them, using emotions as a set of interesting information that can guide the choice of what we do next. And that skill, when it's practiced well, is called equanimity. The definition of equanimity is a state of emotional stability, especially in a difficult situation. We probably have heard the phrase, grace under pressure. So I want to talk about developing this skill, not just as individuals, but as teams, because I believe it's a skill that we as people who make products can cultivate within ourselves and infuse in the teams that we work with to be better and better and better at what we do. So let me give you an example of this. I'll tell you a story that happened to me. This is a number of years ago now, when I was still working as the CEO of Typekit. It was December, it was very early in the morning, it was still dark out. I was in bed. I woke up to a very strange noise coming out of the loo. So I got up, sort of walked over, looked in, and I found this. So the good news is, I know who this is. The bad news is, he was on his fourth loo roll, just jamming them down in there. So immediately, right, as a parent, equanimity, a time of emotional stability, right. We sorted out the problem. We went downstairs, he had his breakfast, and I did what I do most mornings, which was log on to the chat room. We ran our whole company on chat, even 6-7 years ago we did. And what I saw was, even at 6 o'clock in the morning on this cold December day, there was a lot of activity happening already. Engineers were up, code was being deployed, problems were happening, and they were referring to some of the systems. So I went and looked at the monitoring that we had in place for those systems, and I found a chart that looked like this. Now, I don't know how many of you are experts in data visualization. This is a chart that shows something going all right for a while and then going really, really wrong. So let me explain the story behind this chart with just a tiny introduction of what Typekit is. It's a service that allows web designers to use web fonts. It does so by hosting those fonts in a central location, distributes them out onto people's websites. You would go and choose a font. The important bit here is that like when you're ready to use the font, you push that green button that's up there that says publish. When that happens, in the back end, the fonts and some JavaScript and some database stuff all mixed together into a thing that we kind of metaphorically would call a kit. So that kit then gets moved from the Typekit servers into something, and this is all a bit technical, I'm sure some of you are all familiar with this, to a thing called a CDN, a content distribution network or a content delivery network. And what that is we move our content into this origin server. That origin server broadcasts it out to the rest of the world because in web apps, the speed of light is too slow for performance that we demand from how our pages load. So you have to move the content closer to people. And so if it's static content, like a font, move it out closer to where people are viewing their web pages, and it loads a lot faster. This chart then shows the number of times that people have pushed that publish button, created a kit, and put it into a queue, but that queue has not been delivered to the content distribution network. That is, this is overall how many kits we have sort of building up in the queue. So instead of moving over, we're getting a situation like this. Making it worse because people are then going to their website, reloading, not seeing the fonts and going back and pushing the button a bunch of times, trying to make it, and they're just making more and more kits. And it's backing up and it's backing up, and our systems are sort of like now buckling under the load. So we go to our morning stand-up. The engineers have already sort of identified at least where the problem is coming from, not why the problem exists. And that is that one of our partners has been bringing us 20 or 30 times more traffic than they ever have in the past. That partner is About.me. It is a site that allows you to create sort of one-page profile, personal websites that point off to other places that you might exist. It's a service that allows people to kind of have their presence online. We supply fonts for them for those profile pages, and it's going crazy. I called the CEO, and I said, hey, something's going on with you guys. And he's like, yeah, we launched. We had 400,000 new users in our beta list, and we turned them on, and it's going great. And I'm like, yeah, thanks for telling me. That's awesome. Thank you. Anyway, he says, the fonts are a little slow, something a little wonky on your end. I'm like, no problem, nothing, we're on it. Don't worry about it. He's like, that's great, because we have more news. I realize we just launched, but things are going really well. And we're going to announce on Monday that we got acquired by AOL. We're going to be in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and TechCrunch. So there'll probably be even more traffic then. I'm like, no problem. No problem at all. We got this. This is also the part where I explain how tiny Silicon Valley is, because Tony, the CEO of About.me, is also an investor at the VC fund that is invested in Typekit. And in fact, he's on my board. So Tony's sort of my boss in this case. And so while he's telling me this, all I'm thinking is, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. And when he says, Monday everything will be fine, I'm like, yep, it'll be fine. No problem. So it's December 17, it's the weekend before the Christmas break. So half of the team is expecting to go up to Tahoe to go snowboarding, and everybody's got plans, they're gonna be with family. And this is the part where you start to have to rely on the values that you have instilled in your team, right? We talk a lot about in startups, and I work with lots of startups now, about this notion of the impact that you can have as opposed to some of the larger companies they may have worked at. Like you can have an idea, you can implement that idea, you can get it in front of users very, very quickly, and you can feel ownership and autonomy around that. But with that comes a responsibility where we don't have a safety net like in much larger organizations. So this is where we have to double down. This is where we decide, do we put the startup as the thing, as our priority, as what we're gonna do? And we did. We had 3 days on the December the 19th. It was Friday the 17th, and on the Monday following, we were gonna get all this new traffic. we obviously had to do something. And so this is where we started to really practice some of what I was talking about before, that equanimity. This idea of taking all of this emotional anxiety and trying to find a way to structure it, to understand it, and to channel it into productive output. So on the 17th, we decided we would spend this time identifying the problem with as much detail as we possibly could. On the 18th, we would build a solution. And on the 19th, we would integrate and deploy. And so we had that structured. We identified the team and the various teams that would be involved in that, and then sequestered them, right? Like, look, building web stuff is not at all rocket science, but we can learn a lot from rocket science about how we build our websites, right? And the way that they organize themselves around these incredibly stressful events is informative. So everybody knows exactly what their job is. And we isolated them. So the team that's building the technical solution to solve the problem doesn't have to worry about anything else. Notably, removing all of the business decisions from solving the technical problems. So I can very clearly say to them, go solve the problem, do whatever it takes. We will worry about customer support. We will worry about partnerships. We will worry about PR. You do not need to worry about that whatsoever. And then finally, just moral support. Right? This is a very San Francisco startup refrigerator. It's only microbrew and soy milk. It's, but yeah, there you go. But this is how we're doing it. We are trying to set up the conditions for success, right? By using structure to manage anxiety. Structure to manage emotions, to make the right skillful choices in these times of stress. And that really is the definition of equanimity. So let's go back to the problem, right? On that first day, we identified that, in fact, we are creating kits just fine. In fact, the bandwidth and the pipeline between us and the CDN is fine as well, but the origin server is just dropping them all on the floor. They're just bouncing off. Nothing is getting in. So this is where we sort of caught, I think, our first break, is that we decided on the 18th that we would create our own origin server, which was possible, that it would talk to the rest of the CDN, which was something we had planned to do. We had a product plan saying there's a bunch of new features that the CDN's origin server doesn't provide. We want to be able to do things like dynamic subsetting and all that sort of stuff. The problem is, of course, the product plan called for about 8 weeks worth of work, and so we were going to do that on Saturday instead. So you have probably heard today a couple of people talking about minimum viable product. This is as stripped down and minimal, just as barely working, barely functioning, but highly performant piece of software that we put together and in fact let run overnight, and it was able to, without any of the features that we eventually wanted to have, at least was able to keep up with the new, what became the new normal in traffic and performance, such that on Monday when they made the announcement, the fonts were in fact showing up on all the profile pages, and we had a new sort of bar raised for the amount of traffic we were able to support. You see that sort of pride in the work from the senior developer, Paul. He's now in charge of the platform development at Slack. But this is certainly, there's pride in their work, and I obviously celebrate and cultivate pride in our work, but it's also kind of an articulation, a tangible articulation of values. And that's the kind of thing that I think really starts to build the kind of culture that I want to talk about today. So what did we learn from all of this? Well, you're all product managers, so you know this first one, right? That everything breaks all the time. And that's what's normal. And that's what we have to design our teams for, right? That a hurricane can hit the Amazon data center at the same time that you were migrating from Rackspace, turns out. That can happen. And we have to account for that everything is connected, that there is nothing that can work on the web in any sort of isolation and in a protected sense. The other thing, which is what I've sort of spent 20 years in design working on and advocating for, is that everything is user experience. It's not just the interfaces that we create, no matter how sort of holistically we do user research and all that sort of stuff. Every single thing whether it's the performance of the system or the way in which we structure our DevOps or the partnerships that we have forged in the contracts between us, all of that should be considered part of a user experience process. And when a user experience process is applied to every part of a company, I think we have a much higher likelihood for success. But the thing I want to spend the time talking about for the rest of the day is that teams thrive with this sense of equanimity, and that we, as people who can lead teams, can cultivate that with them. So I want to talk a little bit about an example of this that Allison was talking about earlier today, but I thought, should I leave this in? But I think it's important enough that I could sort of reiterate it again, and that's Google's Project Aristotle. The New York Times Magazine wrote about this a couple months ago. This idea that Google spent all of this time doing this huge study of all of their product teams to try to find out what the qualities of those teams were that led them to success or failure. And the only thing that they could find that correlated between all of them, across all of it, and you can imagine how much data they would have had to gone through, because they're Google. That in this company that is renowned for its computer science, the thing that brought success was a sense of psychological safety on the team. Psychological safety is the one thing that brought technical teams together and made them successful. In particular, a sense of confidence that the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish somebody for speaking up. How do we cultivate that in our teams? Right? I've looked for inspiration all over. For example, in Hollywood, Steven Soderbergh, the director, film director, amazing work. In an interview I saw with him, he had this quote, that some believe tension is a good creative tool. I am not one of those people. He's a man after my own heart. Instead, he said, I'm not trying to control them, being his actors and his crew. I'm looking to amplify whatever it is about them that I find compelling. I like to keep the environment pretty relaxed but focused. Relaxed but focused, and a sense of safety that builds trust amongst the members of the team as the thing that we can do to create a successful environment. We don't learn this. We're not taught this. And in fact, most of us, when we went to our first jobs, kind of inherited the way we learned how to do work, right? Not the content of our discipline or our craft, but the way that we executed our work. We kind of learned from the way the companies that we work for just behaved. And most of them are modeled after work like this, right? Like this is how most big companies, small companies for that matter as well, think like it's the foundation of how they started the norms within the organizations, where productivity was the number one thing, and measuring productivity and thinking of humans as resources, right, that could be measured and improved upon. You see this guy way up here, the one with the vest on, right? He's writing on his clipboard, he's got a stopwatch in his hand. That's management. I'm going to manage this team and get the most out of them I can possibly get. That is the antithesis, I think, of what Soderbergh or what Google Project Aristotle found. In fact, I look for ways to create this creative environment. And I don't mean like fancy startup offices. I mean things like shared values and safety and camaraderie and trust amongst the team so that they can feel safe to be as creative as they possibly can without the fear of rejection. So, let's get a little more practical and talk about ways to do that. I spent the last 3.5 years or so at Adobe. And Adobe has a strong meeting culture, to say the least. I would have on any given 40-hour work week about 60 hours of meetings scheduled for me. For me! They would just show up. So I thought I would couch the rest of this talk in meetings and what kinds of meetings we had. So this is kind of how I feel about meetings. I like this. Get to point at things with a stick and feel important. So yeah, meetings. When we worked on Typekit, I felt like the times that we had together as a team were the most valuable moments that we could experience with each other, and we should make the best use of them. So we sort of we treated them as events in which work was going to happen, not just times when we sat around and discussed things. And so let me take you through a few of them. The first one is the stand-up, and I bet many of you have a stand-up. Seems like there's a lot of talk of like Agile and Scrum and those kinds of things. We had a sort of modified organic version of our own stand-up, modeled after How many of you have ever seen the show Hill Street Blues? Anybody here? I realize we're in oh, yeah, there's a fair number of them. This is a show back in the 80s, I think it was, maybe late 70s, set in New York, police cop show. And every single episode started with the sergeant kind of going through like what's happening in the city. He's like, there's a little more, there's some pickpocketing happening in the Upper West Side, there was a murder over here, and he would kind of go through everything that was happening that day, give everybody the information. They all came together at the same time, the start of the shift. And before he would let them go, he would say, hey, be careful out there, and kind of sent everybody off to go do their job. We took that, to me, that was almost the whole point, that we were just all gonna come together and we were gonna start our day together, collectively. And we did it through they still do it. The Typekit team in Adobe still does it. There's 60, 70 people now. They still do a morning stand-up. Every single person on the team, the office manager, salespeople, engineers, everybody on the team. If it got longer than 15 minutes, we were doing something wrong. We were very disciplined about it. We started them at 10:05. I don't know why that works, but if we started them at 10, nobody got there until 20 after. Start them at 10:05 and everybody's there on time. Like I said, every single person comes, but, and this may sound contradictory to the sort of psychological safety where you feel free to speak, nobody can talk at this meeting except the people who have some information to impart, and it's very, very structured and disciplined. We essentially acted it out. It was like choreography through the meeting. There was no discussion except, I have a question, what is it? Okay, great, you two, great, offline. 15 minutes. No laptops, it's a time to do work, and certainly no problem solving. Stand-ups fail when you try to solve problems in them, right? Because nobody else cares about the two people trying to solve the problem or what that problem is. So the more it can just be a start to the day, a connection, everybody on the same page, great, off, let's go do our work. Just led to a sense of momentum and pacing that really, really resonated with us. Tools, everybody wants to know what tools we use. For the first 3 years of Typekit, we used this email. And one person would I generally would perform the meeting, and another person would sort of take notes and gather questions and things like that. Copy and paste every day, edit, send to the entire team. Worked pretty well. So there you go, tools. So that was the morning stand-up. Weekly, we would do a product review. I called it product review very specifically. It's not a design critique, it's not design review, product review, and that sort of elevated it. We took everything there, from a database schema, to URL structure, to a new interface that we would talk about. I did this because I was involved in a lot of product reviews when I worked at Google. And at Google, they were called design reviews. And they felt a little like this, where the designer would take their beautiful work that they'd done, this beautiful clay pigeon of design work, and look what I've done, and then boom, everybody, the engineers would just take shots at it. It was awful. It was awful. I never wanted to have that experience again. So product review. This, by the way, is Frank Lloyd Wright's in his studio, where he would have his students come and show their work, and I really like that. I don't know why there's a tree in the middle of the table, but he should know, I guess. So product review. This one has optional attendance, but absolute mandatory participation. If you're there to work. And the work that we're going to do, we're going to define what that is, and we're going to do it together. Not a forum for expressing opinions. This is the key to doing product reviews, that opinions are not on the table at all. Let me show you what I mean. Really bad feedback is, I don't like that blue. It is aggressive, right? It shuts down any sort of work that we're doing together. Compare that to, why is that blue? An open question. Tell me, you made a choice. Tell me about the decision that you made. Even better, right? Is color important here? Is that, what are we doing here? So asking open-ended questions so that the person who made the decision can explain the work that they did, and that you can have a conversation about that. Much, much better than this sort of intimidating disapproval of the work that we see. And it's really important to remember that this is a forum, right, a working session for group problem solving that is either convergent or divergent. You may have heard this framework before. It's a good one. So divergence is brainstorming, right? We have a problem that we have defined, and as a team, we are going to come up with as many potential solutions as we possibly can. right? That yes and that comes from the world of improv, where two people are on a stage and they're improvising, and no matter what the other person says, you say yes to them and then build on top of it. But if I say, wow, there's a lot of people on this bus, and you say, no, there isn't, we're done. Well, all right, thank you, everybody. So we're building on limitless possibilities versus convergence, where we have already done this. We have taken a whole bunch of ideas and possibilities and iterations and learning and testing, and now we have come together to choose the final solution, to evaluate the feasibility of what we've built or what we're proposing to build, acknowledge what all the constraints are, and drive toward consensus. And every time that I've been in a meeting where these two things are confused or not everybody's on the same page about the goals of the meeting, they've been a disaster. And generally, it is the executives that have it wrong. They always want more ideas, their ideas, but that's what happens, right? Well, no, we're trying to get to the solution. This is a meeting about conversions. So we would set that up at the beginning of the meeting. Which kind of meeting, which kind of conversation do we want to have? Now, you'll remember from that slide before that everybody came to this, or that the attendance was optional, but what turns out is many, many people would come from all different parts of the organization. And that was incredibly valuable as long as they had the ability to be productive in a product conversation, because not everybody does. And that was one of the key goals that we had as a team, is to elevate everybody's ability to participate in product reviews, to have that sort of, that gut instinct for what makes good product. And here's a couple of tips about how we did that. The first is, we've heard this a couple times today, exposure to users, right? The more exposure we could have our team, the more we could expose our team to actual customers of the product, the better their design instincts became, because they developed a sense of empathy. And that empathy is so incredibly powerful in anybody on the team, whether, again, it's a salesperson or an engineer that was working in DevOps and, carries the pager all the time. When they saw people struggle with the product that they were working on, it created a sense of empathy that would help them with their design instincts. It would help sort of build their gut feeling for what should be happening. The other was sort of a matter of taste, right? The more exposure to great work, the better their design vocabulary, the better they could articulate what they saw and how it could be improved. And we did that by sort of endlessly looking at beautiful things. We would look at our customers' websites that they were using the fonts on. We would talk about what made, where there were good decisions, where there were not so good decisions, and why that was. We would spend all this time talking about the qualities of the typefaces that we were putting in our library, and having, again, engineers, salespeople with strong opinions about the aesthetics, and developing that over time. And then, finally, it's the team itself, right? That is, that a diverse team has broader product insights, that you have more angles to look at when you have a team that comes from a variety of different socioeconomic levels, gender, ethnicity, culture. When you have teams that are mixed of many, many different types of people, you have many, many different lenses to look at a problem and get better results. So exposure to users, good vocabulary through good design, and a diverse team. All of this is attempting to generate the sense of good taste. And I know, like, when you think of good taste, sometimes you get this, like, sense of class and all of that. I believe good taste is the thing that you're not born with, you can learn, and that we can communicate sort of even top down in our organizations of this is what we aspire to. Let's all rally to get there. So the third meeting is not a meeting we like at all. It is the post mortem. It is a meeting that we have when something bad has happened, and we have to sort of take that apart. And I use this image of this industrial process because so much of the work around these postmortems and quality engineering comes from this sort of the improvements in the industrial process in the late 20th century. So we are building products that are digital and they're malleable and that we update all the time, that we continuously integrate and continuously deploy. What that means is that we have multiple times, for some of us in our products, multiple times a day that something bad can happen. That deploy that went out, that new code that went out onto the server, made something happen such that the service is not available anymore. Bad. But here's the sort of interesting thing about that. Somebody pushed a button to make that happen, thinking the right thing would happen. Nobody pushes the button thinking, I'm going to take the site down, unless they're some kind of sociopath, right? They always think they're doing the right thing, which means they are in an environment where the circumstances have gone wrong, because their intent is the right thing. But our human instinct, when something bad happens, is to find the villain. Who did this? Who's responsible? Get that person in my office right now. That is our instinct. It is so well documented in the world of psychology that it's got a term. It's called the fundamental attribution error. That is, when bad things happen, we assume it's the attributes of a person rather than the circumstances they were in that is at fault. So that we seek them out, so that we can punish them, so that we feel better, generally about ourselves, I think, is how that works. There's a way around that as well. Again, right? That's an emotional response that we can understand and identify and make a decision about how to react. One of the places I look, and I'm sure many of you have heard this methodology because you're all sort of in this sort of stuff, is from Sakichi Toyoda, who was sort of considered the father of the rebuilding of the Japanese economy after World War II. He was responsible for a lot of the automation and improvements that brought the quality of Japanese products up. And he was the one that sort of invented the 5 whys. Asking why 5 times to get to the root cause of a problem in the quality of a product. So there's this sort of, I think it's probably apocryphal, I'm not sure. It's a good story though, so we'll pretend it's real. There was the story of Jeff Bezos visiting one of the Amazon fulfillment centers, and the whole thing is shut down. And he's like, what is going on? And they're like, well, there's a problem with an employee who hurt his thumb. So he gets out a whiteboard and he says, all right, let's get down to the problem. How did the employee hurt their thumb? Why did that happen? Well, it got caught in a conveyor belt. He's like, why? Well, the employee was chasing his bag. And he's like, why? Well, he put it on the conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt started up unexpectedly. Why did he do that? Well, he was using it as a table. Why on earth is he using the conveyor belt as a table? The employees have no place to store their personal belongings. We don't find that employee and fire them. We get lockers. And it solves the set of circumstances that led to the outage in that fulfillment center. We saw the same thing. This problem that I was telling you about earlier, that kit publishing had been stalled at Typekit because we identified it as why is this happening? The queue is growing. Why? Because kits are not being delivered. Why? Because the origin server is not accepting kits anymore. Why? Because the vendor's origin server is designed for high output, not high input. Why didn't we know that? Because input rate was not defined as a requirement a year ago when we first started speccing out the entire system. Set of circumstances that led to an outage, not the attributes of the people behind it. But think about how that, if you take that approach, think about how that changes the sort of emotional atmosphere in the team. People are not afraid of the consequences of an outage. They are instead continuously focused on improving the circumstances that lead to better success. So 5 times asking why. Okay, so the last meeting is sort of the anti-meeting. It's a phenomenon I think. How many of you spend most of your day in Slack now? There's a lot of hands. So the group chat has this anti-meeting. One of the things I really learned, so Typekit was about 60% in San Francisco headquarters, 40% distributed, but we acted like everybody was distributed all the time because what I found was when you had remote employees, it required this sort of communication tax. And I actually learned to really enjoy paying that tax because it helped me to more clearly articulate and communicate the vision of the company and the priorities and stuff like that. So if you treat everybody like they're that way, you're doing better communication. And I think group chat is a fundamental way to make that happen. So one of the things it does is this sort of sense of communication compression. And I think one of the problems we have with a lot of the email overload that we all experience all the time is that fundamentally email is about creating documents. And it's right in the applications. You say you want a new email, and it pops up a thing that looks like a document where you have all of this space to write, and so you fill it in. So how many of you, for example, could get a 3-paragraph email from your boss asking for something and write back with that? Anybody here feel comfortable doing that? Oh, that's good. There's a few people here. That's excellent. I'll talk to you afterwards. You feel like, I gotta well, thank you for your note. I appreciate you pointing out. You're saying all these words. Words, 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 when all we want to do is get stuff done, like this, right? This is a typical sort of chat interaction, messaging interaction. I think it removes hierarchy. I think it allows us to perform at a lot higher momentum. So the communication compression. I also find that there's this, so one of the things I think Slack in particular did really well was this sense of robots. We always had this sort of, affectionately termed the Typekit robot that was in our Slack room. This is before Slackbot and stuff like that. But it does these integrations, right? And what that creates is a sense of ambient accountability. That is, people are doing work, the output of that work only goes to the chat room, so everybody else goes there to see the output, and you get a sense of like how people are doing and what they're doing. So code deploys and pull requests and support tickets and revenue and all this stuff is coming into the chat room, and it feels like that's the heartbeat of the company, and it's all associated with the people who are doing the work, and so you get this sense of accountability, but it's not this sort of 360 review, like looking at OKRs and all that stuff. All of that's important too, but this is a daily sort of thing that we celebrate with animated GIFs. Of course we do, right? So you do a big code deploy and everybody knows you've been working on it for a long time, and you get the code out onto the server and you go back to the chat room and it looks like this, and you're like, I did some good work. And we save the most important, like if you really like hit it out of the park, you get the Chuck Norris thumbs up. You can't beat that. So I like the cultural aspects of it, but I actually think it's really important. I don't think it's just frivolity or just blowing off steam. I like to think of these as micro-appreciations. Like we are sort of taught that what you're supposed to do is get up and go and look somebody in the eye and say, you're doing really good work. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're on the team. And I think that's vital. I think that's great. But I think it's incredibly emotionally expensive. So we don't do it very often, which is also very human. And since we don't do that very often, we use reactions and GIFs and things like that to sort of pat people on the back and to say, this is awesome, I think you're doing a good job, in a very inexpensive way that we can do a lot. And that builds the team. And it builds, that, again, that sense of trust, respect between one another, and all of that. Now earlier, Jeff talked about time horizons. And I think the sense of these meetings and the sense of pace is a form of this, right? This real-time sense of the heartbeat of the company is momentum. And we kind of measure that in days, and we say, yeah, good week, everybody, a lot of progress, good looking numbers, nice job, right? Progress is happening, things are moving. But projects, we sort of think about those in weeks, right? Like we think about milestones as getting us to minimum viable feature set for some event that's coming up, or whatever our deadline happens to be. Projects in weeks, zoom out a little bit. And now we're talking about months, and we have priorities, and maybe we do that in quarters with OKRs and things like that. Or, we clearly communicate we're going to focus on performance and distribution next quarter. And we zoom out even more in years, and we start to talk about the vision, right? The overall vision of the company. Why are we even doing any of this? I still think Google's is one of the best I've ever seen. This idea of organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible. And why this articulation of the vision continuously throughout the company is so important is because we need every single person on the team to be able to articulate their work in the context of that vision and make the connection. But I think we can go even farther into more of a sort of timeless way of thinking. Zoom way, way out and talk about purpose. Purpose beyond vision, beyond just what our company is doing, but how are we contributing in the biggest sense? So let me share a couple of thoughts on that here as we wrap up. There's this concept in the Japanese culture called ikigai, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, and I apologize, but the rough translation is sense of purpose. And there's this study that happened a while back, tens of thousands of people over decades, this enormous study in Japanese culture about this. And what they found was when they asked people how their work connected to a bigger purpose, the people who could very clearly articulate that and say, oh yeah, I do this because of this, this, and this, and the bigger purpose, those people lived longer. Like they didn't die as young because they had this sense of purpose. Fewer cardiovascular events when people were able to clearly articulate. And we see this in all cultures. It's not just a Japanese culture. It's just more codified there. But this idea of purpose, the sort of Renaissance idea of the raison d'etre, or the Judeo-Christian sense of the divine will for my life, or in Eastern traditions, the sense of nirvana, right? This goal, this achievement. It reminds me of a story I've read to my kids from Winnie the Pooh, the good one, before Disney made it weird. So they're walking down the path, right? And Piglet asks, when you wake up in the morning, Pooh, what's the first thing you say? And he says, what's for breakfast? And he asks Piglet, what do you say, Piglet? And Piglet replies, I say, I wonder what's going to happen that's exciting today. And then Winnie the Pooh says, well, that's the same thing, which I think is cute. But what's going to happen that's exciting today? That's, I think, the ultimate thing that we can achieve with our teams, where everybody on the team wakes up thinking, yeah, what are we going to do today? What my work connects to this vision, and even bigger, to this purpose. There's a lot of ways that you can talk about this sense of purpose. I think about it in the context of, honestly, how we as a species have been successful, right? Like, what was it that helped us sort of elevate out from where we were, tens of thousands of years ago? And to me, there's many theories on this, agriculture, commerce, right, or something. But to me, it's literacy. Like, that is the thing where I could have an experience, and I can write it down, and that allows me to essentially take that idea and teleport and time travel. Like, my idea can go beyond where I can physically get to, and my idea can persist longer than I can. And I think so much of the technology that we have been working on as the human race has been about making that easier and more effective, right? We have developed systems to allow us to take our collective experiences and broadcast them out. And one of the most important things that happened in a previous generation was the digitizing of that, to where we took the concept of ideas and expressions and experiences and divorced them from the physical representation to make them infinitely copyable and shareable and distributable. Even more importantly, we made it personal, that we were able to all do it, right? That became accessible and then incredibly distributed. And every time I think, man, we have leveled up, and this feels like the plateau. We are more connected, and anybody is able to contribute in the most democratizing way that this technology enables, then we take another step, and I'm amazed again at what's coming next and what we're going to do. And this is what we all do. This is our jobs, right? We are defining it, not just for ourselves, but for the generations that are coming, because we are sort of the first ones that are getting a crack at what this digital connected world is really about. So what are we going to do with that? What are all of you going to do with that? Can we find a way to take this amazing network that we put together and to make it even easier for anybody to share, to connect? That's what I sort of would challenge you about. Find the people that you trust to work with, find the thing that excites you, and go out and build it. And I can't wait to see what you all come up with. Thank you very much.